Now it says live.
Hello, welcome to Cpp.chat, the first video podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. And we certainly do have a C++ developer with us here today. But before we get to that, John's here as usual to read this week's disclaimer. John?
The content of this episode is confidential and intended for the recipients referred as our audience only. It is strictly forbidden to share any part of this episode with any third party without a written consent of the episode's producers. If you receive this episode by mistake, please reply to this episode and follow with its deletion so that we can ensure such a mistake does not occur in the future.
Now, I should say we've actually had a bit of feedback about your disclaimers, John. In fact, they seem to fall into two camps. The first camp, they say they really love your disclaimers, the thing they look forward to in every show, and they want to know where you get your material from. But the other camp...
That's what Google's for, right? It's to define disclaimers that are complete nonsense and take out the words, whatever the original sense is, and insert the word episode.
Right, but the other camp say they don't understand your disclaimers, and they're not sure why they're in the show.
That's right, because some of them are going to worry that they're going to take it seriously when I say, do not share this episode or any part of this episode.
So I think we should start putting a disclaimer at the front of the show to say this show may contain disclaimers.
Yes, I think that's brilliant.
I should also just take the opportunity before we get started to apologize for some of the recent gaps in the episodes. If you've been listening regularly, you'll notice that we haven't had much material out in the last couple of months. The last episode we did do was with Herb Satter at CPPCon. Now, we did do another episode at CPPCon, and unfortunately we had a bit of an accident with the master audio, and I'm trying to recover what I can from an iPhone backup, but I'm not sure whether we're going to be able to succeed with that or not. And we also did an episode in San Diego a couple of weeks back that I just haven't had time to edit yet because I've been traveling ever since. So I'm probably going to complete this episode first. So I'm telling you now that we'll be doing some of the episodes out of order, and then hopefully we'll get back on track again after that. But don't worry, we will be back onto a regular schedule, I think.
Right. The goal, of course, is once a week, but when we get into conference season, it's really hard.
Oh, yeah.
Really hard for us to do that. So anyway, this week's guest is someone that has been wanting to be on the show for a long time. He keeps begging us to be on the show, and we kept running out of reasons to put him off. So, Bjarne,
Hi.
Welcome to the show. I hope this improves your recognition among C++ programmers, because I know that you have a name recognition problem there.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to do a little roundup of stuff going on in the world, and then we'll dig into some of the topics that we selected for you. Over on CPPcast, their guest this week was Jeff Armstutz on SIMD wrappers, and Rob also announced that they are now uploading their videos or their episodes onto YouTube. So I don't think they're doing any video. I think there's no video with it, but the show is on YouTube, so that people who enjoy listening to things by YouTube can do that. And it seems like they actually have more subscribers already than we do, even though we've been on YouTube since our beginning. Right?
Yeah, so we need to do something about that now. The competition is hotting up.
That's right. That's right. It's gonna be a race now. All right. So we want to do a quick around what's going on with conferences, and the big thing is most of the conferences that we've had on our list are now done. Pacific I think now has. It was back in October. I think now all of its videos are on the YouTube channel for Pacific++. CPPCon, I believe all our videos are now up. The call for class proposals is also up. So if you're interested in being an instructor, you could look at that.
That's for next year. Yeah.
That's for next year's. Meeting C++ and Meeting Embedded. That conference has kind of just ended. I think the videos are expected soon. I don't think there's any videos up on that yet.
Not yet, but lightning talks are expected next week.
Okay.
Obviously, Jens does them all himself, so they can take a little while, but he gets there in the end.
Okay, and the next one, of course, C++ on C. Do you have anything newsworthy to say, or are we just waiting for the conference at this point, right?
Yeah, well, it's getting much closer now. It's a couple of months away. All the preparations are going well. It's all coming together. It's definitely feeling like a real conference. So getting really excited about it.
Okay. The Audio Developer Conference also over, but I think videos are now available on that as well.
They are.
And we have a new conference, a baby conference, in addition to C++ on C. Core C++ has been announced for Tel Aviv, and I believe they're already accepting speakers and registrations.
They are. Speakers submissions open till January, so got a bit of time yet, but get on that.
Okay. And there's one other new conference that we want to talk about, and that is the China conference. There's been a China conference. I think it's been held 3 times now, but this has actually been done by a different group because that group wasn't going to do it again. I don't know if they were never going to do it again or they're just taking a pause. But now a new group, UQI, it has a group with pure C++, and they're going to do this in December. And so they're going to do that. And actually, I want to take a minute and give them a shout out, if you guys don't mind.
Not at all.
Hi, I'm John Kaub, and I'm here with my Cpp.chat co-host, Phil Nash, and this week's guest, Bjarne Stroustrup. We just want to take a minute to make a shout out to the C++ conference to be held this December in Shenzhen, hosted by Pure C++ and sponsored by Tencent.
So best wishes and good luck.
Yeah, good luck to you. I actually spoke a couple of times for your ancestor conference in Shanghai, and that was great fun. And there's lots of great C++ in China, so just make some more of it and get it up to date and the latest. We'll fix the language as it goes along.
Thank you guys, and best of luck. You know, I should say, I don't know if you remember this, Bjarne, but I ran into you in Shanghai. Who would have figured that? But I remember in the hotel, we were having breakfast, and I looked up from breakfast, and there was Bjarne in line at the hotel to get breakfast. I was like, who would have believed this? What a crazy thing.
It's a small world.
Yeah. We weren't there for the same event. I was there to do training, and I think I don't know, you had an event you were doing or something. I don't remember while you were there.
I don't remember. I mean, Morgan Stanley has an office there, and I have some contacts in the C++ world in Shanghai. I did a TEDx once, and something or other.
Yeah. So one other announcement that we had down, you want to talk about this, Phil? This is the JetBrains announcement.
Yeah, in fact, before I get to that, I should say I'm actually in the JetBrains office in St. Petersburg at the moment. I'm in Russia. The reason I'm here is because we have a big release of C-Line this week, 2018.3 just being released. And the big news for this release is we now have remote working for most platforms going to a Linux remote host. We'll work on more later. That's being really well received at the moment. There's quite a few other features in there as well. I just did a what's new video, so you can go and check that out. Try and put a link in the show notes for that. So if you're interested, please check out the latest release.
So the use case on this is that I can be sitting at my Mac, editing software that is going to be executed on my Unix web host or something like that. Yes,
that's right. Yeah, just most flavors of Linux are supported at the moment. You don't even have to be running C-Line there as long as they have the rest of the tool chain that's needed and can be accessed via SSH. That's how it all runs.
So I can actually see the debugging. The debugging is actually, of course, happening on the machine that's running the software, but I'm seeing it on my machine and can actually do the debugging remotely. That's a wonderful use case.
Yeah, it's not just the debugging. We've had that for a while, but it syncs all the files as well transparently for you as if you were working locally.
This is exactly when I was working at Amazon. This is exactly the scenario I was in, except I didn't have this tool. So I was essentially, it was way cruder. Yeah, that's terrific. All right, so I think those are our announcements. Now let's talk about the main stuff. And the first thing I want to kick it off with is talking about all these conferences. Is that I'm talking to Bjarne. Your keynote launching CppCon got great reviews, and I mean better than normal. For you, because I think the reason is because you're actually talking a little less about C++ and more about programming generally. The topic was generic programming generally, and you were, of course, talking about concepts and how much this is going to be supporting. Did you feel when you sat down to do this that it was a kind of a different thing for you?
Well, no. I was in a bit of a hurry. I wasn't sure I was going to come this year. I wasn't sure I had anything to talk about. And then I had to get it done. And I've been working with concepts for something like 20 years. And I thought I wanted to go beyond the language features and language support and actually talk about what's a good concept, how do you use them well, what does this has to do with programming in general. And I have a long-term hope that generic programming will be just programming. And I want the support for generic programming to be as similar to the support for ordinary programming. And so I really wanted to be able to say, my standard example is sortable ref. And that's what you do to say sortables. Just like you say square root of double, you should be able to say square root of a number. And if it's a template and there's lots of implementations, you get that. And once you get close to that, you then start discussing what is a concept? What's the relation between types and concepts? What's the relation between concepts and similar ideas, similar concepts in other languages? And my ideal answer is that a concept says how to use an object, and a type says how to use an object and how to create it. And that's sort of all. And the closer you can come to that ideal, the better off you are.
Right. I think it was a great talk, and as I said, got lots of great feedback. People were very, very pleased, and I think that as we start to get into paradigms like this, we have a lot of talks at CPPCon, and a lot of them are focused on language features and things like that. Whereas this is kind of a more take a step back and talk about what the entire process is, because a lot of people have never had any formal training in generic programming at all, and so thinking about that as an overall approach is something that we don't have enough of. And I think there was the response from your talk, I think, was kind of proof of that.
I thought it was fine. I looked up this morning. There's 50,000 views. Assume that half of them actually viewed it, so that's not bad. And I think a lot of the talks we tend to get too clever. That is, people who give talks are clever people, experienced people, and they very often fall into the trap of talking to themselves. And sometimes we have to step back and say, now, what is it that's important to people that are using this stuff? What's important to the vast majority of people that are not in the top 1 or 2% of programmers? And I was trying to do that. I was not totally successful, but hey, it has to be tried.
Well, so speaking of the top 1 or 2% of programmers, there was a meeting in San Diego, and got some great results there. I think the biggest one that people are talking about is that Rain just got voted in. But
standing ovation in the room when that was announced.
Yeah. Are there anything you want to talk about specifically in terms of accomplishments there and what we should be looking at for 20?
Sure. First of all, the best quote about the standards meeting was somebody who said, traveling across the ocean for the privilege of working 12-hour days for a week on C++ is insanity. And that's what it felt like. I mean, you start working after breakfast or over breakfast, and you carry on to roughly midnight, with formal meetings ending at 10 o'clock. We were trying very hard to stop the formal meetings at 10 o'clock. This is hard work, even if it's in a nice place. And there was an insane amount of work. I calculated that the amount of words that was that we had to look at was about 3 times the combined works of Shakespeare. and there was 180 people there. There's legislative bodies that are smaller than that, and we had to make decisions. But I think we're coming up. There's a chance if people just keep sane and on track, C++20 will be great. And we will get the complete feature freeze in Kona in February, and then we'll know. I'm very happy about ranges. I'll finally be able to say sort of v instead of sort of v.begin, v.end, which well, I haven't done it because I have my own little library that shortens that form, but getting it in the standard is good.
Yeah.
And I actually think that the most important feature of C++20 will be modules. We haven't voted them into the working paper yet, but it's coming along. All the problems are apparently being solved. We're down the details level. And the implementations are showing really good performance. The general idea is instead of the header file stuff, we're going to get proper code hygiene. That is, you don't leak macros all over the place, and aliases don't get in the way, a type diff doesn't spoil your code, all of that kind of stuff. And in return for better hygiene, we get compile time speed. And the Clang guys report 2 to 4 times speed ups. The Microsoft guys report 5 to 10 times speed up. The numbers are not comparable. The Microsoft implementation is a bit more mature. The Clang implementation, I believe, uses parallelization to a higher degree. So you can't combine them. But look, something like 3, 4, 5 times speed up. So just think what that will do to your compile farms or your compile times. This is going to be great. And it'll also help with the bugs because you have to get better hygiene. And this works together with the concepts, and it should be really great.
Okay, so this is requiring guesswork on your part, but is this going to speed up adoption of more modern versions? In other words, what I'm saying is that I have a feeling, there's some companies that try to stay cutting edge, but there's a lot of companies that have been very, very slow to adapt C++ because they're looking and saying, well, there's some new features, big deal. But you give them a significant build time, that might actually be enough of a motivation for people to say, oh, wait, this, maybe we do need that.
I certainly hope so. I mean, bean counters don't understand about code quality. They think it's something the programmers are telling them to get more time to write code or something like that. But with modules, you can say, well, you're running a server farm of 100 computers. How would you like to run 20 instead? Or maybe 30. They can understand that. Right. Just look at your electricity bill. That's going to help. Oh, you have problems with your footprint in your server room. We can help. That kind of stuff works. And I would like to point out that the better code hygiene is really good for templates when you use concepts. And when you use concepts, you actually compile faster than you do with workarounds. So there's a great emphasis on the practical aspects of simply getting the code through the compilers faster, finding more bugs as you do it, and avoiding more bugs when you do it. So I've got high hopes for 20.
Yes, you have high hopes. You seem to be smiling. In the past, you've been critical of the speed at which the committee has processed. Are you happier with the speed now, or are you simply happy with where we are now?
I'm happy with where we are.
Okay.
Running an organization with there's 180 people present, that means that there's more than 300 people involved. It's really hard, and we don't have any reasonable management structures and such. We try very hard. And I would like things to move faster. In particular, I would like things that helps in foundational areas to move faster. And I wouldn't actually mind at all if the little details on the side and the minor features moved slower. Some people have heard me going on about the good ship Vasa that sank because people added too many features on it, where they should have been working better on the foundational things like the keel and the space for ballast in the below water, where you can't see anything. And so I would like to shift things in that direction, work better on the foundations. But yeah, people want to work what they want to work on. They're enthusiasts, they're volunteers. It's not something you can say, no, don't do this for a couple of years, do this instead. And then people do get worried about new things. When I'm saying you should do generic programming just like you do ordinary programming, they say, but templates, fully generic programming, refs, what about enable if? They go right into the obscure details that most people shouldn't know about in the first place. And that takes time. So I'd hoped for concepts in 17, but didn't get it. On the other hand, modules were not ready for 17, so I'm happy that so far they have not been postponed.
So
the totality of what's coming out in C++20 when it works, if it works out, should be great.
You made reference to the fact that there's so many people. And you also reference to the fact that the number of papers, or maybe not the number of papers, but the number of text, the amount of text to read, both of them set records in San Diego, and not by a little, quite a bit.
And I think sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that one of the changes that the committee has tried to make to deal with this is creation of a couple new subcommittees that they call incubators. And so for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with the inside of how the committee works, there's essentially a core chain and a library chain. And there's one group that's the inner group that's concerned of actual wording. And then there's a group that's called evolution. And the evolution looks at the bigger picture of the features, and then they forward that to the wording group that makes sure the wording's right. And now we've added something before that, a preprocessor yet before that, which we're calling incubators, where I think the role of the incubator is to maybe screen out features that aren't quite ready to be seen by the evolution groups, and maybe fast track those features that they think, maybe even combine papers on similar subjects. Did you get a good feeling for? Did you attend any of the incubator sessions at San Diego?
I did not sit into an incubator session. I'm sort of nailed to the floor in evolution.
In evolution, right? Sure.
And I observed what they were doing, and maybe this will be important. But I think they have to be not focusing on being efficient. On the contrary, they have to be focusing on being thoughtful. The purpose is not to get as many proposals through as possible. It is to increase the quality of the proposals and to stem the flood of novelty. A lot of the community is scared stiff about the activity of the committee because they fear a lot of change is coming out. And there's two kinds of change. There's the breaking changes, which we try very, very hard to avoid and usually succeed at avoiding, but people don't believe us when they haven't seen it. And then there's the changes that changes the way you can write code, which again takes some getting used to, takes some learning. I have never seen a new feature that was useful and powerful that wasn't misused and overused for a while till things settled in. And think about the educational establishment and such. It takes time for these things to work their way through the system. And so, yes, I want more things, but the focus on the foundational aspects. And then I want them backed up with understanding about how to use them, and maybe tool support also and things like that. That takes time.
Mhm.
So the purpose is not to get the maximum number of features, but on the contrary, to get the highest quality.
Right. Well, but on the other hand, being able to process papers quickly, particularly separating those that are not really ready for prime time from those that are ready for prime time. I mean, that's a lot of work. It's just because of the sheer
It
amount
is.
of papers to do. And I sat in on one of the incubator sessions, I should say a couple of sessions, but one of the library incubator. And I thought it was a great idea. And I thought it was a way of helping the library evolution group essentially leveraging what it's doing. And
it could work out very well. And I think it may be a better idea for libraries than for language features, because libraries can be somewhat isolated from each other, whereas foundational features in the language
interact.
touches upon everything.
Yeah.
And one reason I'm sort of cautious and such is that we have some bottlenecks in the committee, and it's the core working group and it's the library working group. Everything funnels through there, and each of those has between 1 dozen and 2 dozen people who take active part. And if you have feeders, 150 people feeding into those groups, you risk errors and you risk burnout for the people in those crucial groups.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say we have to focus on getting fewer and more higher quality papers to them, as opposed to just getting as many as possible with the current level of quality.
So I spent a couple of days in the incubator groups, mostly the language incubators, and bear in mind that it's the first time we've done them. I thought they were working really well, according to what you've been talking about. One of the questions that was asked a lot is, should we spend more committee time on this particular proposal right now, or should we put it on the shelf? And quite a few proposals didn't go any further forwards because of that. And those that did then got more time spent literally incubating the design, so that what was then forwarded was of a higher quality. So I think that was working as intended, and hopefully we'll get better.
I am not saying it's not working. What I am saying is that given the committee process and the way we work, it will take probably a year before we'll know what the net effect is.
Yeah.
When you pour something into one end of a pipe, you actually have to wait to see what comes out of the other end of the pipe before you know whether you're successful or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't quite have that patience.
Yeah. So one of the things that Herb does once a year is he gives a report at the committee of the activity of the Standard C++ Foundation, which you're one of the directors of.
Yeah.
And this year he was talking about the spike in attendance and the spike in the number of, and I shouldn't say a spike, it's much higher, but it seems to be the trend. There's no particular reason to think that the number of people attending, of course, San Diego is continental US, it's easier for some people to travel. So I suspect that this is going to be a high water mark for a little while, but it's not like suddenly it's going to drop off.
There was almost as many in Rapperswil.
Yeah, we were at this is the new normal, right? But what Herb showed in his talk was he showed a correlation, if not causation, with the work of the Standard C++ Foundation, whose job it is to promote C++, and also the holding of conferences, CPPCon. And I would love to think that all the credit goes to CPPCon, but I don't think causation is as strong there as correlation. I think that just having a new language, because we're basically talking about C++, this has grown so much since the C++ 11 timeframe. So that got me excited. And I think that switching to a 3-year cycle also by itself just generates a certain amount of interest, because people start to see things happening within a time frame that is easier to understand than the longer cycles that we saw previously. So
Sure.
all this long-winded stuff to bring up is I want to talk about not just what we have been talking about, which is the committee, but the entire community, right? There's so much more in the active part of the community. And by active, I'm talking about people who are doing podcasts like this one and CPPcast, people who are doing user groups. The number of user groups since 2011 is much, much higher. And we just went through a roll call of conferences. And it's not just the number of conferences. When we started CPPCon, it had about 600 attendees, and that was the largest gathering of C++ developers that had ever happened. 600 was the biggest number of C++ programmers in one place at one time. However, 5 years later, now, we have at least 2 other conferences that have more than 600 attendees. C++ Russia had over 800 attendees, and I think C++ Now had closer to 700 than 600. They had over 650. There's just a lot more going on in the community. You want to, and then there's all sorts of new things as well. We've just mentioned 3 conferences that are on the schedule now that we haven't held yet: C++ on C, the China CPPCon, and Core C++.
Yeah, we should mention that when you see the list of user group meetings that Jens has been producing, there's always been sort of more than one per day in a month. One of the problems that the C++ community has always had is that it hasn't been a community. We didn't have an owner, we didn't have a budget, and community building is not one of my strengths. And we didn't have a center. Every vendor tried to create their own community and fighting with others. That was a problem. And we knew that. Also, we noticed that standards came every 10 years, except that it was more like 12 or 13 for C++ 11, right? And so some of us knew this was wrong. Herb took some initiatives, I backed them up. He suggested the train model. I helped get the frequency down because I had observed that if it takes N years to do it, then people will push for a delay, because otherwise they have to wait N+1 or N+2 years. So I thought 10, no, that's not good. That becomes 12. 5 or 6 becomes 6 or 8. We have to get it down. So we got 3. I liked Herb's original idea of a major followed by minor followed by major, which allowed us to get major features in and then polish them based on experience. That's not working perfectly, but we'll see. And that created the excitement you had, and the fact that we have more to talk about helps. And then there's a self-reinforcing thing. When people meet, they talk about things, and then they get more things to talk about, and they can go to other conferences and talk again. Both speakers and people that are attending, and people sometimes turn from attendees to speakers and vice versa. So this is really good.
Well,
I think the foundation had something to do with it. I hope so. Been spending some time on it, but yes.
Well, and I think CPPCon, and not just CPPCon by itself, but I think people attending conferences, getting to meet face-to-face with people on the committee, having them talk about that, things like Grill the Committee, which is a ritual at this point. But people begin to understand, oh, the committee is just made up of people, and maybe I could be one of those people. And I think that exposing people on the committee as speakers, as attendees at conferences, lets people talk about and think about that, and it gives them a reason to say, well, maybe I should go to my boss and make the case that I should be going to the committee to represent my company. And I would like to, as I said, I obviously CPPCon can't take all the credit, but I would like to think that there's a role being played there of putting people in the room with other C++ developers, and as you say, they start talking about things, and then when they talk about things, ideas happen, and papers come out.
And one thing I would like to see at these conferences is more application talks. We had a really nice application talk keynote at CPPCon about graphics and movies and that kind of stuff. And a couple of years ago, we had the Mars rovers. I think we shouldn't just look at the language, we should look at the way the language is being used. That's sort of one direction I would like to see things developing. That'll also bring in more people because they would be interested in how their kinds of applications are being done. There are a large group of people who think that sort of conferences and language design has nothing to do with their everyday lives, and they are wrong.
No, I agree very much, and was delighted that Mark Elland, who was the Academy Award winner, who gave that talk. He's talking about Houdini software that's been used in all these award-winning motion pictures that use CGI, which today is so many of them. He was excited about being CPPCon, and I think he plans to just be an attendee, whether he's giving the keynote or not. And this is what excites me. I'd love to see more people from that industry. I think there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of industries where C++ is important to that industry, but the rest of us don't necessarily know about. As a mainstream C++ developer, I don't know about all the industries that C++ is critical.
Exactly. I was surprised to see that the matrix is programmed in C++, and that's a little bit scary.
I didn't. I should ask you about this. You said that you feel like you're, I don't know what exactly what you said, nailed to the evolution group. Do you feel like you miss out by not being able to see some of the other committees in action?
Definitely. I think one of the problem areas in the committee is that there's not enough overlap between library evolution and evolution. There's a lot of issues that cross over the library language divide. It shouldn't be a divide. It should be something that tied the language together. Like, tell me, why is variant a library thing as opposed to a language thing?
Like
you could do it either way.
Yeah.
And there is a proposal for language variant that didn't quite get discussed in San Diego.
You mean the pattern matching stuff?
It was alongside the pattern matching stuff. In fact, pattern matching was sort of pushed up ahead of it.
Yeah,
that's why we didn't get to talk about it this time.
I gave the first presentation on pattern matching about 5 years ago. Things take time.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to be in more places, but I can't.
Yeah.
The cloning technology is not quite up there yet.
Not if it's written in C++.
Well, not anywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good thing.
So I was in Library Evolution. I'm kind of thinking, I've been thinking about something that we did, and I think we made a mistake, and that is that we got something that was referred, and it was, I can't remember exactly what it was called, is const expr evaluated or something like that, but it was, the idea was great. It was a way of asking and saying, is this const expr function actually being evaluated at compile time, or is it being evaluated at runtime? And that's a valid and interesting thing to do. And the proposal that came to Library Evolution was saying, well, we know that we've got this feature and we're trying to figure out what it should be called. There wasn't really much discussion about it. Whatever the name was seemed to be appropriate. But the other thing was,
it's called is constant evaluated.
Yeah. And should it be, what header should it be in? And one of the possibilities was, well, maybe it won't be in any header at all. The compiler just is supposed to know about this function. And we discussed that. And the biggest killer was that it was pointed out that means that the compiler also has to know about STD and the STD namespace. And that was more of a concern than that the compiler would know about a particular function. But I think And I didn't say this at the time because it hadn't occurred to me at the time. It felt wrong somehow to have this in the library in a weird way. And now I'm more convinced, as I've thought about it, this should be an operator. You know, operators like size of or decal type. I mean, we're asking something of the compiler. It looks like a function, but it's really an operator. It's asking the compiler something at compile time. And I think this should be that. I mean, think about this. If it was in the library, if it wasn't inline and wasn't const expr, it actually wouldn't be useful. You couldn't use it. It has to be an inline const expr function. And it pretty much has to be an operator in order for this to really work. And so I think we made a mistake by putting it in the standard library. We should have just said, no, it's an operator. And it's not in any header. It's just like size of.
Curiously enough, I discussed this with somebody at work today. And I actually think it's quite reasonable the way it is. Look at it some other way. Yeah. I don't think this is something that most people should ever use. It belongs deep in the foundational parts of libraries. And do you really want separate operators and for things that are very rarely used? I'm actually quite a fan of Intrinsics. And I don't think it matters. I think it may very well have been the right thing to do. And if you had invented an operator or another keyword or something like that, that was also have been all right. I think having the facility was the important thing. I was not at all sure, and we went through a couple of meetings talking about it, and I kept saying, is it useful enough? Do we have enough cases? And David van der Water pointed out, I think he had 7,000 cases in some of the foundational libraries. Maybe it was 700. It was some large number, but it was clear that his code base was becoming unmanageable, and he needed the help. And so I agreed this was a good thing, and we must have it. But exactly how it looks, it doesn't matter.
Oh, I agree. If this stays the way it's proposed, which it probably will, it's not like it's going to ruin anything. It's just as one of those things. It was just occurred to me because when it was first proposed, it just seemed wrong to me. I was like, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It just seemed like that doesn't feel like a library call to me. And as I think about it more, it seems more like an operator to me.
It seemed wrong to me, but from functional reasons, I didn't think it was necessary. Once I've decided it's necessary, I just want it with the least amount of fuss and the least amount of teaching problems. And I think this is in the ballpark. If some people are going to complain that it's not an operator, if I've made it an operator, people would have wanted it not to be an operator, and they'll find ways of overloading the operator with other meanings, all kinds of stuff. No, we're falling into the trap of spending most of the time on an obscure detail.
Maybe the other way to look at it is, now that we have const expr functions, some things that are currently operators, if we implemented them from scratch today, maybe they wouldn't be. Like size of, for example.
You're right about that. One thing I should point out that when we started const expr functions, it was probably the one feature that was hardest opposed in the standards committee. It was claimed loudly and repeatedly over years that const expr functions, compile time evaluated functions, were useless and unimplementable. And once we got it, people changed their mind a bit. And then we saw the explosion in people want everything at compile time. And partly as a joke, I pointed out I could get compile time threads. So the question is, what is actually useful? And now I think we are getting to understand things a bit more. The set of features that was approved in for C++20 in San Diego are not a random set. It is a set of features that together points towards a more unified view of the language. For instance, you can use user-defined types as template argument, template type, template value arguments, which is something we've been trying to do for 20 years. Now we can do it because of const expr functions, and the const expr functions are becoming essential for the future of reflection, static reflection. It's feeding into there. So it's not just people wanted everything const expr. We're actually a little bit more thoughtful about it, and it has a direction. The features together are more important than any individual feature.
Well, yeah, I think that, the compiler, the demands that is placed on the C++ compiler, it's this monstrous, it knows so much. And there's so many questions we would like to ask it, which we can't ask. I mean, the compiler knows.
Roll on 23.
It knows, what's that?
Roll on C++ 23. 20 is not the end of the world.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I'm not making a plea for a particular feature at a particular time. I'm just simply saying that the compiler knows all this information. It has to. It's this incredible machine. We're putting so much requirements on it. It knows so much, and there's so much we could do if we could figure a way to ask the question. And of course, for a given compiler, we can always make it. What's that?
No. We are figuring it out. That's what.
Yeah.
It's not easy. That's why it's 23, not 20. Right.
And I think that what we can do in static reflection is going to be really cool. It's going to open up all sorts of opportunities.
It will. And first of all, it'll solve some simple problems for us. Most of the uses of runtime reflection are expensive and leads to bad code. But there are a couple of really important use cases that will be handled by the simplest versions of static reflection. And those are the ones I'm looking more forward to. What I fear is, as usual, when clever people get to do really clever things with them, and that can be a problem.
What are these runtime reflections that you're talking about that are
if you go to most languages, Java would be one, you can get a description of your type system as basically a graph, and you can walk that graph. And so your programs move away from the source text into a graph walk of a program structure, which can do really nice things like writing. You can read and write every structure. That's how you do JSON, for instance. And that's good. The problem is that now you can't read your source text or your program to see what it's doing, because it has turned into an interpreter. And it's been turning into an ad hoc interpreter. So it's slow and buggy. If we can take the important and useful parts of what's being done there, like saying, give me a JSON writer and give me a JSON reader, and we can write that in a piece of static reflection code in, I don't know how many lines it'll be, 10, 15, 20, that kind of order. And then it's there. Poof, we've got it. And I can read 15 lines of code. I cannot read a complete interpreter running over an arbitrary graph.
So would you say that any sufficiently complicated const expr function contains an ad hoc, informally specified, bug-ridden, slow implementation of half of Common Lisp?
I wouldn't. It's the generality that I fear. Yes, and I knew that one was coming, and it's one of the oldest jokes in the world in the field. Yes, much appreciated.
So we're waiting until we can send email at compile time. Is that the ultimate?
Can we do that?
Oh no!
Yeah, I think I could do that.
Sure. Get an email saying, this code.
No, you get the compiler to call some other program that's the emailer. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
My son wrote a program where the ultimate exception handler sent him an email saying the system is going down.
There you go. Now,
If he can do it in his system, which had nothing to do with this, I can do it in the compiler. I used to write compilers, right?
Yeah. So what else should we be talking about? What are you thinking about that's not necessarily the committee, but C++ in general, the feel of what's going on in the world of C++? There is one other topic we could get to maybe before that, and that is that we did have an evening session in San Diego on education. We started a new study group specifically to look at education issues. This is something a little outside of what we normally expect the standard to be. I don't think this committee is going to necessarily be, coming up with wording that will go in the standard at any point. But it may be that this committee will make comments about teachability or things like that.
I think it's a splendid idea.
Yeah.
Because we have the people that are interested and to whom it's important to do certain things in the committee. Traditionally, we have followed the ISO rules for languages and talked only about languages. Now we're talking about tools, we're talking about education, we're talking about application areas, because we have the critical mass of interest and individuals. In this particular case, there's two people that was working on it, and they're being very, very active now. And one of the things we would like to see is recommendations for curricula, not this imitation Java or C with a few extra features, but using the experience we've got and making materials available for teachers. Professors are very, very busy. They don't have the time to prepare. So we have to help them. And I know that Christabello and Jan Christian van Winkel, who are leading up this effort, is already in contact with quite a few teachers now out in the world, and I have hopes for that. As you all probably know, I've been teaching C++ at various levels for forever, including beginning programmers, and mostly these days I do graduate students, but as late as 5 years ago, I was mostly doing freshmen. So I have some experience there, and I have hope for that group.
So the class you're doing in Columbia is a graduate class?
It's actually half last year undergrads, half graduate students.
Tell us a little about this class. What is the class?
Well, it's called design using C++ or something like that. So it is what I think is interesting in the space where you have C++, we have C++ libraries, we have C++ language features. How do you design things? How do you evaluate things? How do you describe a design? How do you present a design? It's a good excuse for me to talk about things that I find interesting at the time. There's a core of things that sort of I have to bring them up to speed for C++. Most people have either been not taught much C++ or they've been mistaught. And so I use 2 weeks to bring them up to snuff. And I give them the tour of C++, which is now in the 2nd edition. And I use that they read it in 2 weeks and they write something about it. And I use that as a diagnostic test. And based on what I learn about that group of students, I gear some of the other lectures and the exercises. And at the end, they have to do a project, 3-person project ideally, which ends up with documentation, with code, with examples, with a tutorial, with design documents, a whole project completed. And that usually works very nicely.
Mm-hmm. All right. That sounds great.
I can't take that many students, though, because, well, then I wouldn't understand what was going on.
Yeah, sure. So getting back to the question that I asked you earlier before I started, interrupted myself to talk about education. what comments or thoughts do you have about what C++ is doing outside of what the committee is doing? In other words, talking about the community, which you said you're not much of a community organizer. I think that's kind of what Phil and I want to be able to do. But what's going on that you see and happy about or not happy about?
I'm not very good at community things. I learned that the hard way. So what I'm more interested in is what is C++ being used at for, what is its strength in those areas, how can we compensate for its weaknesses, how can we increase the strength? And I keep falling back on the old idea that C++ is there to deal with hardware at the low level and then abstract away from it with zero overhead. And that's where its real strength is. And if you look out in the world, that's where it is spreading. I mean, there's more C++ programmers today than there ever was. And if you look at the areas that I'm most interested in, I mean, you see the cars and the planes and the spaceships, they have this interface between the hardware and the software where I'm always interested. If you look at Facebook and Google, yes, that's where they are. Again, they need to use their hardware optimally. They need to use the concurrency facilities optimally. They need to use their caches optimally. This is not just a dumb model of the hardware that then you can ignore the hardware. That's where C++ strength is. And if you look at something like the concurrency group and the work done there, that has a lot to do with that. And I think we will eventually see work on NUMA architectures to be able to use memory better. So what I'm trying to say is you have application areas with challenges and solutions, and then you look at those and see how you can support them better. That's the feedback loop between applications and language and library design. And when it works, you get more users. I fear a drag where people try and do things the old way and wanting more support for the old way, like some of the stuff in the game industry is working based on models of programming that was put in place 20 years ago. They could do much, much better by writing a more modern style of C++. Sorry, I'm sitting at home and there's home things happening like nuisance phone calls. If anybody has a way of stopping nuisance phone calls, I would like to know it. That's a technological problem coming from computers and they are getting too good at it. Not everything we do is used for good purposes.
Well, talk to your friends at Bell Labs about that. That's
Bell Labs is gone. Unfortunately, that was the greatest place on earth for that kind of practical engineering.
Yeah. Well, time has whizzed by. We need to think about wrapping this up. But I appreciate you taking the time talking to us about not just what the committee's doing, but also kind of what's going on in the community. And I'm intrigued by, I really want to follow up, but we'll have to do it some other time. I wanted to ask you about the kinds of programming paradigms that you see the game industry doing that you think could be modernized, but we'll have to talk about that.
Let's keep this one vague and let the people in the games industry try and beat up on me and see what happens. They sure will.
Yeah, they're not going to be
shy.
The gauntlet has been laid down.
I have put down a challenge for them.
Okay, all right. Well, Phil, was there a topic that I needed to cover or that you wanted to?
No, I think we covered it all now.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, then let's bring this to close. I think we started pretty close to on time. It looks like we're finishing pretty close to on time. This is
could be a first.
Yeah, this could be a first for us. So I encourage you to join me to wish all of our listeners and viewers safe coding.
Safe coding.
Safe coding. Bye.
All right. Thank you.